After my last video, I became genuinely curious to discover more ambitious 3D games on the Game Boy Advance, especially after some of you guys started recommending even more for me to check out. The more I go through these games, the more I appreciate how creative developers had to get with the hardware. Some of these games genuinely make me question how the Game Boy Advance was even handling all of this. With that being said, here are 5 more 3D games developers somehow managed to squeeze onto the hardware. And the first game I ended up checking out was Iridion 3D, which might be one of the biggest examples of that. Flashback to Space Road 2000 in Japan, this was the event where Nintendo officially unveiled the Game Boy Advance alongside a lineup of upcoming games. And around that same reveal period, Iridion 3D became one of those early titles that felt like a visual showcase for what the hardware could do. A sci-fi rail shooter developed by Shinen Multimedia that looked way too ambitious for the Game Boy Advance. The moment the game boots up, you're greeted with this visually detailed mechanical looking menu screen with rotating menu options and a moving background that already gives off this illusion of depth before you even begin playing. Getting into the gameplay, the game still manages to look really impressive for the hardware, with giant space backgrounds, detailed environments, and sprite-based enemy ships flying through the screen constantly helps sell the sense of speed and scale. I also really enjoyed the music in this game. The game leans heavily into synthwave, which fits the early 2000s sci-fi atmosphere really well, especially during the transition before a boss fight. I thought the boss designs were pretty interesting too. I've been a fan of sci-fi art growing up with games like Metroid Fusion, and some of the designs definitely reminded me of that kind of atmosphere. Graphics can only carry a game so far, and in this game's case, it started feeling like more of the focus went into the visuals than the gameplay itself. There's barely any story here. You're basically defending Earth from an alien invasion by the Iridian Empire, but there's almost no lore or exposition explaining who they are. It doesn't completely ruin the experience or anything like that, but it does make the game feel pretty generic outside of the visual presentation. Your weapons also feel incredibly bland. Most of your shots only fire straight forward. The fire rate feels slow even after getting upgrades, and the power-ups barely felt worth picking up half the time. It really felt like there was a lot of missed opportunities for bringing more depth into the gameplay. Things like homing missiles, spread shots, speed boosts, super lasers, anything to make the combat evolve more over time. I thought the camera angles were weird. Aiming feels awkward a lot of the time. I constantly struggled trying to line up my gunfire with enemy ships. Sometimes it barely even felt like my shots were connecting properly. Your own ship also blocks your point of view once the screen starts filling with enemies and bullets flying everywhere, which made some sections feel way more chaotic. Compared to something like Star X, where you could brake, slow down, and move around more freely, Iridion feels much more limited mechanically. There's no boost system, no barrel rolls, no weapon variety, and because the gameplay doesn't really evolve much over time, the repetition started kicking in pretty quickly for me. After around the 4th level, I kind of put the game down, which sucks because the presentation generally pulled me in at first. Visually, it still manages to look impressive even now, but at least for me, this ended up being one of those games where the style and presentation carried the experience farther than the gameplay itself. One of the games that got recommended to me after my last video was Wolfenstein 3D. For what this actually is, it's pretty impressive to even manage to get this running on the hardware at all. Developed by Stalker Entertainment, this version is basically a portable port of the original 1992 PC game, which is widely considered one of the grandfathers of the FPS genre. Games like Wolfenstein helped shape a lot of what the first-person shooters would later become known for, which is fast movement, maze-like level design, secret hunting, and running around blasting enemies from a first-person perspective. This was actually my first time playing a Wolfenstein game. I also wasn't really a Doom player growing up either, so a lot of this old school FPS design still feels pretty new to me. Playing this honestly made me want to eventually go back and explore more shooters from this era. Even though this GBA version is obviously heavily downgraded to fit onto a handheld, you can still feel the foundation of the original game underneath it. Visually, for the Game Boy Advance, it's still pretty impressive seeing this style of FPS running on a handheld at all. The sprite enemies, environmental details, doors opening, and even bodies staying on the floor still capture a lot of the atmosphere from those older PC shooters surprisingly well. The sound design is kind of lacking though. There's barely any music for most of the game, but at least hearing guards yelling in the distance, dogs barking from another room, and gunshots echoing through hallways weirdly adds tension while wandering through these giant maze-like levels. Actually playing it on the GBA Definitely took some getting used to. Since I was emulating the game, I originally started playing with an analog stick, before forcing myself to switch over to D-pad controls instead, just to experience it closer to how someone probably would have actually played it on the handheld. And after around 20 minutes, my fingers generally started getting tired, especially because the turning acceleration feels kind of unnatural, although at least we can strafe with the L and R buttons. That definitely helps the movement feel smoother once I got used to it. The bigger issue for me was constantly getting lost. A lot of these levels are giant maze-like corridors with barely any landmarks, so at the time I was wandering around trying to figure out where the next key or elevator even was. Part of me respects that because it feels very old school and unforgiving, but at the same time, it also started getting pretty frustrating after a while. I know the game eventually has boss fights later on too, but I ended up getting so lost navigating some of these levels that I eventually put the game down before even reaching them. Still, for a Game Boy Advance adaptation, it preserves way more of the original's game's identity than I expected. And more than anything, it made me curious to eventually experience the original PC version properly. After getting completely lost in Wolfenstein, I decided to switch things up for a bit. Another viewer recommendation I checked out was Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride, a portable version of the original arcade and Dreamcast game developed by Graphics State. I ended up having way more fun with this game than I expected. The objective is pretty simple. You drive around the city picking up customers and trying to get them to their destination as quickly as possible before time runs out. For what the game is, the entire experience is supposed to feel chaotic. You're flying through intersections, launching down giant hills, weaving through traffic, smashing through cars, missing turns, going off-road. A game where I'm pretty sure you can get overstimulated. Visually, the game is doing way more than I expected to. The city itself uses 3D environments with buildings stretching into the distance, while the cars and characters are sprite-based. And when you hit another vehicle, the car spins around using these exaggerated sprite animations, rotating in 3D. It's janky, but in a really fun, arcade kind of way. The city also feels surprisingly large for a Game Boy Advance game. There's giant downhill roads where you start picking up insane speed, areas where you launch off ramps, shortcuts off the main roads, and moments where the map generally feels bigger and more open than I expected from the hardware. When playing, you'll start noticing the compromises holding everything together though. A lot of the buildings reuse the same textures over and over again. Traffic starts feeling repetitive after a while, and I swear I kept seeing the same blue car, red car, and a U-Haul truck looping throughout the city the entire time. There are also moments where the frame rate noticeably drops, especially during times a lot start happening on the screen at the same time. The audio also feels toned down compared to the original versions of the game. At first, I actually thought the controls felt too stiff for how fast the game was moving. I kept overshooting turns, slamming into walls, and struggling to react while flying down hills at high speed. The giant directional arrow tells you where to go, but half the time, I felt like I had to rely more on instinct just to avoid crashing into walls or driving into closed-off streets. Crazy Taxi actually has a bunch of driving mechanics from the original game. Once I started practicing things like Crazy Drift, the game suddenly started feeling way smoother and way more fun to play, and seeing that taxi slide around corners while shifting into that little 3D angle honestly looked pretty cool. It made me appreciate the port a lot more than I initially did. The basic gameplay loops around repetitive on paper, but once the mechanics start clicking for me, trying to optimize routes and maintain speed became weirdly addicting. I do want to go back and replay the original versions even more after playing this. This game manages to capture the chaotic arcade energy that makes Crazy Taxi fun in the first place. As chaotic as Crazy Taxi was though, the next game somehow stressed me out even more, and all you're doing is rolling around inside a ball. Next up was Super Monkey Ball Jr., Sega's attempt at bringing Monkey Ball to the Game Boy Advance. And out of all the games I played for this video, this was probably one of the most stressful experiences the entire time. I was already butt clenching, trying not to fly directly off the map. Visually, this game is really impressive with the hardware. The stages themselves are fully polygonal 3D environments. What makes Super Monkey Ball so different is that you're not really controlling the monkey itself, you're controlling the platform underneath the monkey ball. Every movement changes the angle of the stage, and gravity does the rest. So instead of directly steering your character, you're constantly trying to control the momentum, along with the balance, speed, and physics all at the same time. Before each level starts, the game rotates the entire stage around, which allows you to look at it from different angles and try planning your route beforehand. The monkeys, bananas, and bumpers are all sprite-based, but they blend surprisingly well with the 3D environments. Even the bananas spinning in full 360 degrees look really satisfying to watch. For a handheld game, the game still manages to create a really strong sense of depth and height. There are moments where I barely tilt the stage and I immediately watch my monkey launch directly into the void while my soul leaves my body alongside it. You don't have the luxury of using an analog stick here. Everything is controlled using the Game Boy Advance D-pad, which makes tiny adjustments feel way harder sometimes. And yes, I was using a D-pad, even though I was on an emulator playing this with my controller. To compensate for this, the game actually adds extra controls, where the A and B buttons can change how steep the platform tilts, which is a pretty smart way to adapt the controls onto a handheld. There were still tons of moments where I felt completely out of control, especially at the end of the stages. There were so many times where I thought I finally reached a goal, only to realize you can't just touch the ribbon at the end. You actually need enough momentum to break through it properly. Oh my god, please, please, okay. Please, just
Hurry up!
shut up. Shut up. Yes. Overall, the amount of content in this game is also kind of crazy for a Game Boy Advance game. There's unlockables, minigames, even multiplayer, practice mode, and score chasing. It feels like they were trying to squeeze a full Monkey Ball experience onto the handheld instead of making some watered down side version. I think that's what impressed me most about it. Between the visuals and the gameplay, this ended up being one of the most enjoyable games I played for the video. Lastly, another viewer recommendation I checked out was Driver 3, which might be one of the most ambitious games I played for this video. This was developed by the same team behind V-Rally 3, and they definitely had a reputation for pushing the Game Boy Advance hardware as far as possible. But instead of just building racing tracks this time, Driver 3 actually tries recreating full open city environments where you drive around doing car chases and even on foot shootouts. It almost feels like they were trying to squeeze a miniature GTA style game onto the Game Boy Advance. Visually, for a Game Boy Advance game, it actually does a pretty decent job selling the illusion of a living city, whether you're driving through the streets or exploring on foot. Buildings spread surprisingly far into the distance, traffic constantly moved through the streets, and the vehicle sound design sounded way better than I expected from the hardware. But with the game trying to do this much on the system, the flaws started becoming noticeable pretty quickly. The draw distance constantly loads in while driving, and sometimes the game almost feels like it freezes for a split second, trying to load more of the city once you start speeding through it. There were even moments where traffic would suddenly spawn directly in front of me while driving fast, instantly ruining my momentum because I slammed straight into a car the second it appeared. One bad collision can instantly ruin a mission where there's barely any room to recover. And specifically during this mission, this happened numerous times. Your car just springs backwards, and it ruins the momentum, instantly failing the mission and having to start all over again. The on-foot shooting sections also took some getting used to. Instead of freely controlling the camera, aiming works by manually turning your character using the D-pad first, then holding R to bring up the reticle while strafing left and right to line up your shots. It feels awkward at first. A lot of GBA shooters around this time handled gaming similarly because of the hardware limitations. The GBA only had so much buttons to work with, so games like this had to get creative with their control schemes. Enemy AI also isn't exactly the smartest either. Most of the time, enemies just kind of run around like headless chickens while randomly stopping just to shoot you. I got curious about how much you could actually do outside of the missions. Unlike something like GTA, there isn't really much freedom. I tried running over pedestrians, starting chaos with police cars, and generally causing trouble, but most of the time, nothing really happened. I need to talk about this weird moment that happened in the game. There was this weird instance that happened. I failed the mission because of a bush. I'm pretty sure I still had enough time left to finish it too, but the moment my car hit the bush, my momentum completely died and the mission instantly fell apart from there. I genuinely thought I'd be able to drive through a bush, but nope, apparently you can't. Even with all the frustration, I still respect what the developers are trying to do here, trying to squeeze an open city driving game with missions, on-foot shooting, multiple cities, and fully 3D environments onto the Game Boy Advance was an ambitious idea to begin with, and while the hardware limitations definitely show, I still came away appreciating just how much they managed to pull off. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe, or even comment down below, since it generally helps out a lot with the algorithm. I've been really enjoying exploring Game Boy Advance games like this lately, so if there's any weird, ambitious, obscure, or just interesting Game Boy Advance games you think I should check out next, definitely feel free to let me know. Thank you guys so much for all the support lately, and thanks for watching. I'll see you on my next one.